This is my paper on engaging youth through technology to help develop environmental stewardship. My burning question is, why are kids using technology excessively, and how is it affecting their relationship to nature? My thesis is, if electronics are used intentionally and utilized correctly, it can help children become better stewards to the environment. The purpose of this paper is to acknowledge how generational play differs, and to use children's interest in technology to get them outside. This paper also aims to understand how technology can help children become environmental stewards. So generational play differences, there's definitely a lot. I'm sure you can all think of ways that even our generation differs from like a kid that's growing up right now, and I know there's a lot between our professors' generation and how we choose to recreate. So while urbanization is growing, access to nature is diminishing, and this could be one of the root causes for why children are choosing to come inside. There was a study by Kinoshita, and it talks about environmental degradation in Japan and how the social and environmental change is stimulating the children to go inside because there's not much to do outside anymore. They talk about a really how play spaces have changed in Japan, and give a really beautiful example. I mean, sad example, but it really resonated with me. They show a picture of this beautiful creek that comes through the town, and there's adults bathing in it, and there's children bathing in it, and there's children and people playing in it, and they're just having such a beautiful time in nature, and like on a hot day, just cooling off. And then they pan to a picture of how that environment looks now, and it was just a street. It was just filled in with concrete, and there were countless examples of this in Kinoshita's essay or article, and it just talks about how as urbanization is spreading, green spaces are diminishing, so it's really pushing children inside or to just not really have access to going outside. In another article I read, it talked about CO2 emissions. In this, it says, in 1960, 125 million tons of CO2 emissions were emitted, and by the year 2012, it had risen to 738 tons, which is huge. In this article, they also discussed that the reason for this is because of urbanization, and as countries are developing, they're creating these metropolises and like very much expanding, and as they do that, the CO2 emissions go through the roof. So as even in Japan, as it's growing, it's emitting more CO2 emissions. And also, as urbanization is spreading, it's diminishing green spaces for children to play. And so it's creating a world where children are having less and more environmental degradation around them from the CO2 emissions, and it's minimizing the green spaces that they even are able to come in contact with. So then I come to how children are choosing to use their time, and there's no surprise when you read these statistics that out of the 11 of 16 countries surveyed, more than 80% of 12-year-olds had access to computers and television and used them both of them every single day or close to every single day. In my second point, it says, in a study researching 6th grade children and how they use their leisure time, it talks about how 81% watch TV, and then 74% get outside and ride a bike or scooter, but then 70% again play video games. So it's just this massive increase in how children are using to spend their time inside, and I think that that's really ties back into the environmental degradation and minimization of green spaces and also safe spaces. With the United States government and news always portraying our world to be such a bad place and so scary, even though that's like some of the lowest crime rates recently ever, they're televising mass amounts and making it out to be this kind of scarier world than it is. So children aren't going outside as much, and they're spending time on electronics more. So that leads me to Ralph's 4 stages of environmental literacy. This is kind of the lens I've been trying to view how people develop environmental literacy through. So first, they're creating this awareness of natural consequences. So if you cut down a tree, it's gone. If you dig a hole, it's not going to fill itself back in unless you move the dirt back. Just very basically. Then it goes to concern for that natural environment. Like maybe they're concerned that someone's leaving that piece of trash there and it's not going to be moved until someone else physically moves it, or they wait 1,000 years for it to biodegrade. And 3, developing a deeper understanding of how the nature is impacted. They become more aware that it does take that many years for that plastic water bottle to disintegrate back into its mineral composition, and how one can take action. And lastly, it just talks about how one can take action and be an advocate for nature. So the end of this is just how one can be an activist and really make that difference in the environment. Negative impacts of technology. There are a lot of negative impacts of technology. I didn't really want to touch on this a lot in my paper because I think a lot of my peers have really focused on this. But I did really like Richard Lou's point when he talks about boredom and how electronics are endlessly stimulating our youth, and that's leading them to be less creative and also not really be able to connect to our natural world. He also brings up a point that in medieval times, talking about boredom was perceived as disrespectful to the creator and saying that our world isn't good enough to even amuse them. So I did really like this point. I thought it was very accurate, but when he talks about the solutions for this, his top solution was parental direction and involvement, and this can help break the cycle. I think, yeah, it can, and that is probably the best solution for this, but most kids that are like playing video games all day do not have that much parental supervision. So I wanted to delve deeper and set those parameters in my paper to focus on how video games are teaching or like alluding to an environmental stewardship, creating those parallels between nature and video games in youth. So I also read an article on how children believe that they have become environmental stewards. This is really interesting because it talked a lot about how adults can perceive that children will learn environmental literacy or environmental stewardship, but it went further and interviewed the children themselves of how they thought they became environmental stewards. And they said influential people and influential experiences. They define influential people as teachers, friends, mentors, anyone that really made that connection to them and helped them recognize nature or taught them about nature and like why it needs help. And they defined influential experiences by just being outside in a group activity and interacting with, like, making a connection to nature that way. So that leads me to want to talk about virtual reality and how some people are saying that it can be as impactful as film in today's world because it's this whole new realm of like stimulation and spending time that you get to discover and make assumptions for yourself. So with examples of intentional video games, it really, in this article by P. Saxton Brown, it's called The Garden and the Machine, it just blew me away thinking about how video games could be utilized in such a powerful way. There's this one about the oil debate, and it was based in Alberta, Canada. Even the visuals, everything is like a small town in Alberta, Canada. And the user, whoever's playing it, discovers that there's an oil debate in the city through finding postings inside the like bulletin boards and things on the ground, and they soon realize there's this huge feud between whether we should advocate for nature and not have oil and like try to find alternative substitutes, or use oil and degrade the environment but also create a lot of money for people that may need help in the environment. And so they get engaged in this issue through voting in the game, and then they see how their voting affects nature and how it just cascades into these rippling effects and helps them experience this really big issue through a harmless way and a virtual experience to help them understand what that means for the environment without actually having to see it, which I think is really powerful. And also, there's one by NASA. They made this video game for clean energy. It's an internet game, and you have to place windmills and solar panels to power your house, and then the winds are always changing and the sun's always moving, and so you have to figure out the best places to put those things to power your house for a whole day. And I thought that was pretty cool to understand how that technology works and to understand that you can power your house through those things. There are also technologies that are actively getting people outside. These include things like Pokemon Go and iNaturalist, both apps on my phone I have used. There's a lot of research going around. I read this research article called How 2 Billion Smartphone Users Can Save the World. And they talk about how programs like iNaturalist can take the user and bring them outside, and it works like in the app you're identifying plants, so you have to take a picture of the leaves, you have to take a picture of the flower if it's there, and the whole plant itself, and then you like write a description maybe about how tall it is, and colors and how many petals and things like that you might not have the best picture to identify, and then you try to identify it yourself, and then an advanced user will come in and correct it. So it teaches you, if you didn't get it right, the real name for that plant. And if you did get it right, it counts for you, and you can work points to becoming an advanced user that helps other people, which is super exciting and helpful for data because it's helping scientists use this data too, since it's checked by advanced people in biology, and they're beginning to understand maps of where these species are living and migrating to with environmental change. And next I want to talk about Pokemon Go, because it might not be as direct of an impact on the environment as like iNaturalist, but it is creating a space where people's fantasy worlds can meet the real world. And so it's bridging the gap between this fantasy realm of video games and the natural world. And it's getting people outside. So you have this video game on your thing, and it's looking at your phone like a camera, and you're looking around and you can like see these virtual Pokemon in the real environment. So you're creating this connection to nature, like I talked about how children actually think that they believe that they can build environmental stewardship. It is helping them get outside and make that connection to nature, and also meet people. So they also have this thing where they have special Pokemon, and that creates these hotspots where people from all over town will come to capture these Pokemon. And I've seen them, and it's always like 20 to 50 people, like just standing there, and they're all talking, trying to get this Pokemon. And it just creates this environment where they can all connect and like be outside and not as stagnant in the individual game realm, but they're really moving more towards the social game realm. And even past that into nature itself, they're not sitting inside with other people, they're meeting new people. So some of the conclusions I came to are, even though technology addiction is prevalent in youth, it is possible to harness and drive a segue to a more healthy outlet. Helping them transition back out to that, though, I think is such a key aspect, because you can't just quit things cold turkey. It leads to like withdrawals, and like you're really craving something. So if you like intentionally do smaller amounts of time and more time like in between in nature, then I think it could really help people transition to a full environmental experience. Technology doesn't have to be the big bad wolf. We could really utilize it, and if that's what kids are interested in, I think that we should embrace that and help them to learn that maybe their like usage isn't like okay, and like time amounts and stuff, but it's okay to be interested in technology too, and we can show them how they can use technology to better help the environment if that's what they really want to do. And this information can be utilized by the recreation field by utilizing technology. I feel like we're so scared of it and we're so against it, but in real life it can be really helpful to its users. Even just with like GPS watches and like learning how to navigate if you don't know how to navigate to certain places. But yeah, I think that this could be a really solid bridge for children to learn how to spend time outside, and especially with the social anxiety problem that's been an epidemic for who knows how many years recently. But it helps break down that barrier that they can still have like their safety net of their screen, but also be embracing nature. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'm also going to set up an appointment to talk to you. Thanks, Randy. Have a good day.